Do you normally start on the hour, or do you wait for people to join? Okay, let me know when to start. Now I can't share my screen for some reason. Great. Why? Okay, hold on. I'm gonna drop out and rejoin, okay?
Okay.
Hi. Let's see now. It's oh my god, it's still not letting me. Okay, I'm gonna have to share. I'm gonna have to share my entire screen. Let's see if that works. No. share the entire screen so you'll see yourselves first.
Okay.
Which is always a bit distressing. Alright. Can you see my presentation screen?
It's clear enough.
I'm gonna assume that you can.
Yes, we can. Rahma, you'll unmute.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I guess.
Okay, give me a shout when you want me to start because it's still like 2 minutes in. Should I go?
What is it? Alright, I guess we can start. So I will start with Bahasa Indonesia first, and then I will let you know when you have to join. Right?
Okay.
Oke, terima kasih semuanya sudah bergabung, semoga sehat-sehat semua. Selamat datang di A11yID Meetup yang ke-7. 7. Dan hari ini dalam rangka Hari Disabilitas Internasional yang jatuh pada tanggal 3 Desember kemarin, International Disability Day. Hari ini kita kedatangan tamu super spesial, very special. Tzveta Dinova, dan kita akan ngobrolin soal e-commerce, gimana sih kita kick off accessibility di e-commerce dalam hal sistem, karena Mbak Tzveta ini bekerja di asos.com atau bukan Tokopedia, e-commerce sangat terkenal yang fashion dan lifestyle oriented dari Eropa yang headquarternya di London. Cuman hari ini Tzveta dari Bulgaria, dari rumahnya. So, dan bagi teman-teman yang baru datang dan belum tahu A11yID apa, jadi A11yID adalah sebuah komunitas yang mengumpulkan teman-teman dari berlatar belakang teknologi, baik itu developer, desainer, UX, content writer dan sebagainya, yang berkaitan dengan pembuatan produk teknologi yang terkait dengan aksesibilitas digital, yaitu bagaimana platform-platform bisa ramah bagi semua orang, termasuk untuk orang-orang dengan latar belakang disabilitas. Sesi ini akan berlangsung dalam bahasa Inggris, jadi habis ini saya akan shift bahasa. And I would like to introduce Tzveta. She was my colleagues back then in the UK when I worked very short in AbilityNet, and she's currently working as accessibility specialist, the one and only in ASOS. Still the one and only. You should add more people.
I love that. The one and only. You know, makes you sound like you're irreplaceable.
Of course you're irreplaceable. And so I guess Tzveta will tell about herself after this. So please introduce yourself, Tzveta.
Thank you. So I've got a little PowerPoint put together, and I can't see anything else other than the PowerPoint, so feel free to interrupt me with any questions. But yeah, hi, my name is Tzveta. I guess a little bit about me. I've been doing digital accessibility for about 3 years now. And before that, I was working in education, in digital education. So I was working quite a bit with students with special needs, kind of trying to help them, you know, study more efficiently using technology, and also use technology to express themselves better, because I feel like that is possible when we use technology in the right way. And through doing that for a couple of years, I kind of went in the direction of digital accessibility. I got really interested in, you know, how can we provide a better experience for people with special needs? And so I ended up in a company called AbilityNet, where I worked with Rahmaut last year, and we did quite a bit of kind of different, varied digital accessibility work. And now I'm based at a company called ASOS.com. and I am their sole accessibility person, as Rahma mentioned earlier, which puts me in an interesting position, which I'll discuss in a bit. So ASOS. ASOS is a fashion e-commerce platform. We are based in the UK, but we operate globally. Unfortunately, it looks like we're not really operating in Indonesia right now, but hopefully in the near future. Some of our main markets are obviously the UK and Europe, as well as the US, Australia and New Zealand. We do operate in quite a few countries around the world, which is also quite interesting when you look at it from an accessibility perspective, because obviously different countries have different legislations. So I'll get to that a little later as well. I want to talk a little bit about kind of like the mission and the purpose and the values of the company. So our mission is to be the world's #1 destination for fashion-loving 20-somethings. Our purpose is to give people the confidence to be who they want to be. And basically we strive to be 3 main things, which is authentic, brave, and creative. And to me, all of these things are very important, because when you look at our mission, our purpose, our values as a brand, you basically, they kind of dictate that accessibility should be at the core of what we're offering our clients, because we want everyone to have access to the same, the same fashion that we're selling, and the same kind of design, and all the other things, all the content, all the tutorials and everything that we're offering. And so it only makes sense that accessibility is part of all of that, and we're striving to go in that direction. We are also recognizing that, accessibility is a process. It doesn't really happen overnight. And I think it's very important when companies recognize that accessibility is important and they need to start working towards it. But you can't expect that, you're going to start this year and by the end of the year, you're suddenly going to have an accessible product. It doesn't really work like that. I heard a weird noise. I'm just going to check that everything's okay. Okay, you're still here. That's fine. Okay, so speaking about being an accessibility specialist at ASOS. So as I mentioned, I'm the only accessibility person in the company. It is a very big company. It is a very big tech team. And I think it's been an interesting year from many different perspectives. So I started exactly a year ago. And I think probably with everything that's happened with COVID and everything that's happened, in the world in general, I think probably my role has slightly shifted. But when I first started, these were some of my this was my job description, right? So take care of WCAG compliance, provide training and awareness across the different teams, from UX and UI to the developers to QAs, anyone that's involved in the product lifecycle. Embedding accessibility in the product lifecycle, so embedding accessibility across these different teams and making sure that everyone understands their role in accessibility, and then connecting the teams with the wider community, being, I suppose, that middle person between, what's happening out there in terms of, following the latest trends in accessibility. I'm sure there is a very strong accessibility community all around the world, like anyone who works in accessibility. So being that middle person. However, I feel like with everything that's happened this year, it's given us a bit of perspective on just how much more important accessibility suddenly is. And not just accessibility, but, suddenly the idea of shopping online and not having to leave your house is probably even more appealing and even more important for the future of e-commerce. So I feel like probably my role has shifted a little bit in terms of, not necessarily that I've become so much more important. I mean, accessibility was important to begin with, but more I suppose the urgency of having to deal with some of these problems, especially in a big company, where you have a lot of people, you have a lot of conversations to have, a lot of sessions, a lot of training sessions to do, a lot of issues to fix as well, and we're very aware of that. So yeah, if anything, I think my role has probably shifted in the past, 6 months or so, probably for the best as well. So speaking of accessibility, particularly in the context of fashion e-commerce, I find that to be a really interesting topic. And I've created this very complicated Venn diagram on the right. But I think I was just trying to visualize my idea of why I feel like it's such an interesting field to work in, because you've got kind of three components that I feel are kind of drive or sometimes even stop accessibility from happening. So you've got obviously the design, the fashion, the creative side, the marketing, because we are, after all, selling, fashion products, and we are selling them to a young audience. So it's very important how we approach that audience. We don't really want accessibility to come in the way of our creativity, of our marketing, anything like that. At the same time, we operate in a lot of different markets. And you do have to consider the legislation in those different markets. And it's not that the legislation is necessarily different, but it's how the legislation is enforced, right? So we know markets like the US, for example, the way the legislation is enforced is, it's quite strict. And I think there are pros and cons to that, the carrot and the stick, obviously. But then you've got other markets where, you're not quite sure exactly how the legislation works, or, anything, kind of what is your necessarily framework other than WCAG. So I find that to be quite interesting. And then the thing that is probably kind of our biggest opportunity is the lack of kind of accessible examples in the industry. And this again can be a pro and a con, because it's really easy, for example, if you're doing accessibility in the financial sector, at least I find it very easy to kind of go out and look at specific companies who have accessibility already embedded in their product, and to kind of take examples from there. Okay, so how have they done this drop down, or how have they done this page, or, whereas in fashion e-commerce, it's actually, and in e-commerce in general, it's quite difficult to find really, really good examples that you can send to your team and say, okay, just do it like they do it. It doesn't really work like that. But at the same time, that's an opportunity, because it gives us the option to be the first ones to do certain things, which I find really exciting. And I wanted to talk about the fact that digital accessibility is tricky in the private sector, and that doesn't mean that it's necessarily only tricky in the private sector. I mean, accessibility can be, quite a big task anywhere. But I think the fact that, particularly, for example, if you look at the public sector, there are very strict, rules as to what you should and shouldn't do. Whereas the private sector is kind of catching up, especially if you're outside of finance and insurance, for example. So I find it quite interesting that there's this possibility to kind of do a lot of different things, but at the same time, you lack kind of the framework to do them, and you're not really sure. I mean, you look at obviously different markets and what they require from you. But yeah, it kind of gives you a lot of different possibilities. And I wanted to talk about the three main things that were happening at ASOS before I joined, which I feel like have made my work much easier. So there was already a lot of accessibility work being done prior to me joining. There were audits and, kind of looking at the core journey, which is something that I think also sold me on the position that I'm in right now, because knowing that the company is already doing, is moving in the right direction is a good start. There was an accessibility champions network, which I can't stress how important that is. Just the fact that you already have people from different areas of the company looking at accessibility and, seeing what they can do about it. And the fact that the team in general and most of senior management were already sold on accessibility, it wasn't necessarily part of my work to go and convince them how important it is. I kind of, I was kicking at an open door, basically, which I think made my position much easier. So based on kind of all of this, some of my starting points with accessibility since I joined, and not necessarily in that order, but kind of in that order. So some of the things I've mostly kind of focused on have been our web and app audits, and obviously kind of doing a lot of the work that we knew where our problems were already, and we just had to go and fix them. And there's a lot of talk about how bad it is to retrofit accessibility, but the reality is you can't just scrap a whole website and 2 apps and start from the beginning, you know? You have to go and fix these issues, and at the same time make sure that nothing new that's been released has new issues, because then you're just creating more work for yourself. There's also a lot of studies that have been done regarding how much more expensive it is for a company to go and retrofit accessibility rather than if you consider accessibility from day one. From the moment you think of an idea of a problem to solve, it becomes something like, I don't know, 10 times cheaper or something, and even more. I mean, obviously it depends on the company and depends on the processes, but yeah, so sometimes you have to do it, and especially in the beginning, you have to do an audit and you have to go back and fix things. But looking forward, that's not really a sustainable way to kind of approach accessibility. The other thing I've been trying to do, and I think that's also like helped me a lot since I started, is engaging with my accessibility champions. So I think, again, that's one of the most important things in a company, because you might feel like you're alone, but the minute you have a network, even if it's just 10 people, you know, and again, it depends on the size of the company, but even if you just have a couple of people supporting you, and they don't have to do it full time, they just have to have an interest in it, it just makes things infinitely easier for you. And especially if they are from different teams and have different responsibilities, they will help you understand their needs, and they will help you understand what you can provide for them to make their job easier, basically. Another thing that I've been doing a lot of, and I think it probably is specific to larger companies, and understanding the company structure, the stakeholders, understanding who's the right person to speak to in different situations. Yeah, all of that basically is key to understanding where to embed accessibility and how to do it, how to approach it. And then also engaging external forces. And by that, I mean speaking to people, speaking to anyone from the accessibility community, reaching out, asking for advice, sharing what you have been doing what I'm doing right now, speaking to you. And I think that's very important, because accessibility is literally ever changing, and you just need to keep up and understand what's happening out there. Also understand your users, you know, understand what the community wants. But I think that should probably come after you've kind of fixed some of your initial blocks. And I'll get to that in a second. So I made a little to-do list for accessibility in any large company. I think that list could probably be applied to a smaller company as well, but I'm obviously looking from the perspective of, you know, kind of like a bigger, more corporate space. So your to-do list would be, and this is not necessarily exhaustive, I suppose these are some of the things that I've identified that are important. You probably want to start by auditing the core journey and understanding, you know, where your blocks are, where the key issues are, and kind of like, yeah, just knowing what are the first things that you need to address. And then also doing an internal awareness audit and understanding how many people in your company actually know about accessibility, know how to apply accessibility to their work. Do they know the importance of accessibility? You know, it comes back to knowing your stakeholders. So knowing who you need to sell accessibility to. It's usually senior management, obviously, but sometimes it's people around you, you know, people that you work with on an everyday basis as well. Look at your competitors. It doesn't matter what field you're in. Have an understanding, you know, the same way that you approach UX and UI, you don't work in a bubble. You always look at what other people are doing. So go out there and just kind of do a quick accessibility review of your competitors and see how you compare to them. Yeah, basically, are they doing a better work than you? And if they are, reach out to them, find the right person and speak to them, because the reality is with accessibility, it's not like it's a company secret. You can reach out to people and you can say, hey, I've seen that you're doing a great job. Do you mind, having a little session to share maybe the way you've approached this in your team? I find that to be really, really valuable. Involve your users. Super important, obviously, because you can fix all the issues and you can look at WCAG all you want and you can tick all the boxes until you show your work to your users. You're probably not going to know whether they prefer this or that, or whether, there might be little tweaks, there might be blocks that you're not aware of. Even if you're really, really good at using a screen reader, you're never going to be as good as someone who uses it on an everyday basis. So you need to always engage with your users, whether that's focus groups, whether that's, obviously like user testing, one-to-one interviews are, the best when it comes to accessibility, but there are different ways to engage your users and ask them what they want. Again, be aware that WCAG is just the beginning. WCAG is a great starting point, but it's not everything when it comes to accessibility, and always strive to go, above and beyond WCAG. And again, that comes from speaking to your users and knowing what they actually want and what they prefer in terms of an experience. Again, create and engage your accessibility network, super valuable, because then you suddenly have, an army of people to help you with accessibility. You don't have to do it on your own. Create a business case for accessibility. I find that to be really, really useful. Putting together kind of like, all the numbers of what it's costing us, how much cheaper could it be if we do it in a different way? How many users? This is like the simplest thing. Looking at the user base of, users who are currently not able to access your website, for example, because you can't access it with a screen reader. What user base is this? You're losing these people, and you're probably losing, their whole household. They're probably not going to use your product. So kind of putting that down and then presenting it, to your senior management, I think has a lot of weight in terms of, together with the stories of your users, having those numbers to know why we should be doing better, I think is a great combination. And then obviously the most important thing is like embedding accessibility into your workflow. So understanding where accessibility needs to come in with different teams in different situations, like who needs what training, what kind of testing awareness do they need, all of that kind of stuff, just making sure that all the documentation that needs to be produced as well, working together with the teams to do that. And that's probably the biggest piece of work here. I've put a little kind of note at the bottom saying how you do this. It obviously depends on the state of your company and the situation your company is in. So, if something urgent has happened, say you've got a lawsuit against you or something, obviously you're going to have to do this much quicker and then maybe come back to some of these points. Otherwise, you kind of have not all the time in the world, but you can do a timeline for yourself and you can say, what is this company aiming to achieve in the next 3 years, and start addressing all of these points. So I find that to be kind of, quite useful to not feel the pressure, but then the reality is in real life, there's always some sort of pressure. How to track your impact. So a couple of things here. I mean, this is, again, from my experience, these are useful things. Obviously, you might discover that in your company things work in a different way, but in terms of dashboards, Jira is probably your best friend, or any equivalent to Jira that you're using to track all your accessibility bugs, to raise new ones, to understand how quickly your teams fix those bugs, which is a big part of understanding how much it's costing you to fix those bugs. Also, just to basically in general track anything related to, fixing accessibility audits, basically. It's probably the first place where you want to have everything all together, to be able to have a view of what's happening. Track engagement, depending on what tools you're using, you might want to, and obviously depending on whether it's a website or an app, you might want to try and see what kind of assistive technology your users might be using. Are they using any assistive technologies at all? What kind of browsers are they using? What kind of times of the day are they accessing, your product? These are all important things. I mean, obviously the assistive technology gives you a lot of information, but if you can't get that information, look at some of the other stats and what does that tell you about your users. Create a timeline with tangible milestones. As I mentioned before, your timeline might be 3 years, and might be 1 year. It depends, but understand what is it that you're trying to achieve, and put it in a timeline, and kind of give yourself a due date to work towards these goals. Track your costs, both internal and external. So an external cost might be, how much is your audit costing you? How much is the company that's auditing you, costing you? An internal cost would be, how much time are you actually spending fixing these issues? Combine those two things, because it's never one or the other, Every kind of minute that you're spending fixing accessibility issues, and I mean retrofitting accessibility issues, you need to track that cost, because you want to lower that cost. And the only way you're going to do that is by bringing accessibility into the workflow and actually not having to go back and fix things. It's just going to, free up a lot of engineering time, a lot of design time, if you start doing it from day one. And then track your gains, in the long run, when you actually get to the point where you're not retrofitting anymore, calculate how much cheaper that is for your company. And you can do these calculations before you even start. You can kind of do an estimation, and it might not be correct, but an estimation goes a long way, especially when you're talking about a business case for accessibility. When you know you're in a good place, engage your users. Again, if you are aware that there are blocks, fix those blocks and bring in the users for user testing. See what they have to say, see whether they like it or not, see whether they can use it or not. These are all very, very important things. So top 3 challenges I had in the last year. I found that question to be quite interesting, actually. So I think the first challenge that I had was just panicking that I'm alone, that I'm the only person in this company who's dealing with accessibility, and how am I going to do this on your own? Until you actually realize you're never on your own. So if you feel like you're on your own, it means you haven't solved accessibility, and you probably need to get out there and sell it to people. But also, if you have an accessibility champions network, if you've created that for yourself, it's just going to make things so much easier for you. And even if you don't have that within your company and you're just about to start, reach out of the company. There's so many people. Go on LinkedIn, find all the accessibility specialists and managers and anyone, especially from similar companies to yours that are in the same market. Find those people, reach out to them, say hi, ask them to have a virtual coffee, You're never alone. And I think it took me a very long time to understand that I'm not alone, and I'm not kind of like fighting this massive, task on my own. So I think this is definitely the first thing that I would say you need to address. And just, don't be scared. Like, accessibility could be very scary, but we need to move away from being afraid of it and start actually doing stuff to make it better. And along the way, you might make mistakes, but it's better than not doing anything. My second challenge was probably how to know that I'm doing the right thing here, especially in an industry where there aren't a lot of other examples to look at and to compare yourself to. It took me a while to know what's happening and, are we really moving in the right direction? And it's only now, a year later, that kind of like a lot of this work is paying off. But again, talking to other people, having other people look at your website or your app or your product in general, it's the best way to get feedback. And the feedback might not always be positive. It's going to take time before it's positive. But any feedback is good, as long as it's constructive, of course. You want to know whether, there's more to improve or whether you've tackled an issue and then you need to move on to the second one. So I would say, again, don't be afraid to reach out to people. And then my third challenge was, for a while, what lies beyond the audit. So we are kind of like coming to the end of retrofitting a lot of the fixes that we knew we had to do. But what happens past this audit, and I spent quite a lot of time, researching and understanding how to do accessibility sustainably rather than auditing, because constantly auditing just means you're constantly creating work for yourself, but you're not necessarily looking at the bigger picture of like, why do I keep creating these issues and then going back and fixing them? You need to actually look at the processes that you're using and how well your colleagues are trained and what do they actually understand about accessibility. So it's interesting, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. It depends on the direction that you're moving in, but you always want to kind of just think about the sustainable part of accessibility and how can I embed it in a way that I don't have to ever do an audit again, or if I do, it will be on like a very specific part that I'm concerned about rather than kind of my whole core journey. So these were kind of my main 3 challenges so far. And the last question, which Rahma and I were discussing yesterday, which team should accessibility fall on? I mean, this is a tough one because I think accessibility should fall on everyone. But if we're talking about, where should accessibility start? I feel like, based on my experience, a good place to start is your design team. So UX and UI, because if it starts there, it creates less opportunity for problems later on, if that makes sense. So if you start creating documentation from day one together with all your designs and making sure that everyone is aware of their responsibilities and you have them written down, and you can then come back and understand, okay, if there is a problem at the end and we've released something with an accessibility bug, we can look back and track it down using the documentation and understand where the problem came from, rather than saying, okay, who didn't do their job properly? And yeah, so like one thing that I think is very important is when you're looking at the product design life cycle. So whether you're doing, you have, UX and UI teams, or whether you're kind of looking at, you have product designers and looking at a more kind of holistic, product life cycle, you have your problem, you have your outcome, you have all the different stages in between. The further you push accessibility towards, the very, very beginning, the better off you're going to be, because there's less chance of actually missing some accessibility steps and not understanding what the requirements are. So this is kind of what I'm trying to do at the moment. Just consider accessibility from day one and, see how much, compare that to where we were like a year ago and see how much better off we are in terms of numbers, in terms of, accessibility understanding, basically tracking all of these things internally and seeing, how much that helps us. And yeah, another slide with some advice, and I don't know, like, this is advice based on, the work that I've done in the last year. But I feel like these are some kind of things that you can start with if you have no idea where to start, or if you have started already but you're not really sure what direction to go in. So if you are a designer, developer, anyone looking to kickstart accessibility in their company, a couple of things that you can do is you can start small. You know, it's a huge task, accessibility. So just identify the most urgent areas of improvement. Identify the blocks. You know, it's a great start, kind of knowing where those are. Create your accessibility network. I'm probably not quoting this properly, but why have a team when you can have an army? Check out the BBC's work on accessibility champions. They have a lot of kind of different talks around this. They're amazing. It will definitely kind of like change your perspective on things if you're not already sold on the idea. It's one of the most important things a company can have, you know, because you're effectively building a team for yourself without necessarily needing the budget for that, because you're just kind of engaging people who are interested to help you out with accessibility. Reach out to your senior stakeholders. If they're not aware of accessibility, if they're not sold on accessibility, start there. Reach out to people externally, you know what you're trying to do. So when you do your initial assessment of the most urgent areas, understand what you're trying to do. Who is the person out there that's likely done something similar? You know, find them on LinkedIn, reach out to them, talk to them, talk to some organizations that maybe kind of are going to offer you support. Talk to communities of specific special needs. See what people have to say. In accessibility, anyone is willing to offer, I think, is willing to offer support. So it's a good way to start. And thank you. I believe that is my last slide. Any questions?
Alright, so kalau ada pertanyaan silahkan langsung ditanyakan via chat box dulu, atau yang dari YouTube via komen, nanti dibacain. While waiting for other to ask, I have a questions. So,
yeah.
What is the most urgent area in ASOS when you define what is the priority?
There are a lot of priorities. So at the moment, to be perfectly honest with you, at the moment, the priority is fixing the issues that we are aware that we have. Mm-hmm. So those are the issues identified during the audits that have been done in the past 2 years. Mm-hmm. That is going to end soon. And then and I mean, it's not the only thing that we're doing at the moment, but it is the priority, definitely. And once we move out of those audits, the priority will be embedding accessibility into the design process, doing documentation, everybody knowing what they're responsible for, so that we won't end up in the same position again, having to audit and having to fix issues. So yeah, I would say at the moment that's the priority. And again, it really depends on what kind of situation you're in, but you're likely going to start with an audit if you are, seriously considering accessibility. Mm-hmm. So, or you're going to have to do an audit at some point. So yeah, I would say that's probably one of your first priorities.
Okay. So, and previously you mentioned accessibility champion, and I know many of the people here don't know what is accessibility champion. What the hell is this? And can you elaborate more? What is the accessibility champion, especially in ASOS?
Of course. And again, as I said, I would definitely recommend looking up the BBC's Accessibility Champions Network, all of their talks that they have around this. But an Accessibility Champions Network is basically getting together people from your company who are interested in accessibility. They don't have to do this full time, and they might be anybody, right? It might be a designer or a developer or a QA, it doesn't matter. Getting these people together and creating some sort of a network where, you meet once a month. It might be less, it might be once every couple of months, and you create an agenda. You know, you give everyone like little responsibilities, even if it's just reporting back and saying, okay, on my team, we don't understand how screen readers work. We don't really understand how to use accessibility as part of our everyday work. You know, this is just going to help you so much. And it's not about giving people more work than they already have. It's about finding the people who are interested, understanding why they're interested as well. I feel like that's a pretty big thing, because if you know why they want to participate, you can engage them more. You know, you can give them more, you know, do they want training? Are they, you know, the chances are a lot of people will be interested for a personal reason, but you can kind of support them better that way. And yeah, just creating, you might be the sole accessibility person or the sole person who has accessibility as part of their title, or not even that. You might just be the only person who cares about accessibility. But, you know, find the other people who might be interested and get together and talk about what needs to be done and help each other out. And, you know, it just makes things so much easier, and you don't have to have a formal accessibility team to do that.
Okay, I saw some of the audience have dropped their questions on the chat box. So, do you want to choose any of the questions, or?
I'm going to start from the beginning. Okay, desktop or mobile to be prioritized. You know, I'm going to ask you, is your product desktop first or mobile first? I mean, that's probably like the biggest question there. I don't think either should be prioritized, but if you are a mobile first product, maybe you need to prioritize mobile. You know, if you're pushing all of your customers towards mobile and towards, you know, like downloading an app, then you probably want to make sure that app is accessible. But again, it's really hard to say, and kind of depends on the product itself.
By the way, before shifting to the next question, in ASOS, is it any platform priority?
Not at the moment, not in terms of accessibility. We are definitely mobile first company, but I would not be comfortable prioritizing either or, especially because we are aware of the issues on both ends. And so it would just, you know, be a bit silly to leave one behind. Web is much more complicated in many ways to make accessible, because you have a lot of different considerations, like how is the user accessing it? Your tracking might not, I mean, it depends how you track things, but you know, you might not be able to understand who's using assistive technologies, but it doesn't mean that you should leave web behind, you know? So we're currently like pushing both at the same time. Maybe in the future, when we feel a bit more comfortable that, you know, things are set on web, we can focus more on mobile or something like that, but not at the moment.
All right. Next questions.
I
think it's come from Ray, right?
Yeah.
You're not so lucky in the story earlier, or maybe you're a UX vendor, not in the company. What do you think you should do to get?
That's an interesting question, actually. So the way I understand this is like you're not in-house. I mean, I would say the same things apply, you know. Who, like, get your stakeholders together, explain to them, you know, one thing that I probably didn't talk about enough is like, you know, the carrot and the stick. Get your stakeholders together, get your clients together, explain to them what the chances are of them, you know, getting in trouble if they don't meet accessibility are. Explain to them how much more expensive it's going to be if they do it retrospectively, you know, if they then have to go back in a year's time and fix things. Explain to them how much more they're going to gain in terms of client base, you know, how many more people are going to be able to access their product. try both ways. I mean, don't go like scaring people, but sometimes like when you explain that this is the right thing to do and you're going to gain so many more clients, if you're not getting the right response, it's probably a good idea to kind of like, start using the stick and explain that you just can't do this. And if you explain to them that if you consider accessibility from the beginning, it's not even going to take that much more time or be that much more expensive. So why not do it? It's going to be so much better for all of your users. We're not just talking about special needs users. Look at the Microsoft statistics on like the different disabilities, when they're permanent, temporary, and situational, and just like, it's just going to improve the experience so much for everyone. Why not do it? Why wouldn't you want to do this? What kind of client would want to create a product that doesn't serve their customers? And it's a lot of clients probably, because they don't understand how important it is, but use this opportunity to educate them, I would say.
Okay. This next question from Kuku, right? Could you elaborate more on how to convince your team or senior management to put oleh as the product requirement? Because as far as I know, here in Indonesia, there's no law enforcement, as I told you before.
Yeah. What I just said, I guess. Okay, drop the part about the law and lawsuits and everything else. Look at the statistics. How many people who, what is your market? Of that market, how many customers do you have who are potentially, vision impaired? That, like, look at the different statistics in terms of, different impairments. You're probably losing those customers. Look at how much buying power those customers have in terms of accessing your product, how much money you're losing by not offering them a service. These are really strong arguments. So that's a good way to start. Just have numbers. I feel like numbers are very often, very useful. And another thing is, like, if you can combine those numbers with a personal story, find a screen reader user, make them use the product. How well are they going to be able to complete the journey? Do a recording of this, or bring the person in. It obviously depends on the situation, but it's so valuable to have that personal story of, this is, not just a random person that I've never met. This is a person in front of me who cannot use my product. Bring that person in. Show how badly they're using the product. I think the combination of those two things is probably going to make a very strong case for accessibility.
All right. And from Alfie, do you mind sharing with us what is your accessibility audit is like? Any user group prioritize? And I guess it's connected with a question from Jason. The priorities of accessible things, low vision, blind, or how?
I mean, realistically, you shouldn't be prioritizing anyone. Also, because if you're auditing against WCAG, you're not prioritizing anyone, because, WCAG is technology agnostic and it's agnostic to the different types of disabilities. So, yeah, I would say, if you are auditing, audit against WCAG, assuming that, that's the kind of content that you're producing, that kind of has to meet WCAG, and then start fixing those, those issues, and don't necessarily worry about, there's a big impact when you look at how a screen reader user accesses your product, but this should not be the only user group that you're considering. And neither should it be, cognitive disabilities or anyone else. You should, if you're doing it accessible, you should do it for everyone. And this is, obviously the beauty of WCAG, although it doesn't stop there. Like, you have to obviously push and go beyond. But yeah, in terms of audits, if you are getting an external company to audit, they will do it for all of your users anyway. They will consider all users. If you are doing the audit yourself, just make sure you tick all the WCAG boxes and you kind of go criteria by criteria, audit against WCAG 2.1 AA, which will give you an idea of how you're scoring for all types of users, not just screen reader users or not just, someone else. And don't prioritize one over the other, because it's just going to create more problems for you.
So, Balfi, I hope that's clear. If it's not clear enough, you can ask it later. And from Surya Dharma Putra, any analytic tools to track how many users struggle with accessibility on our website without doing research directly to the users?
Yeah. So we're not using any tools to specifically track for accessibility. We already have tools that track our user base altogether. So what I've requested for different teams to do is to go and look at, on some platforms, particularly on mobile, it's easier to look, particularly, for example, on iOS, it's really easy to track your voiceover users, your users that use that increase their text size and things like that, which is obviously super useful. It's not as easy to do on all platforms, and it really depends on the tracking tool that you're using. But try and be smart about it. If you can't look at the amount of people who are using a screen reader, look at the amount of people who are using a screen reader on the market. Then look at how many of your users are using different browsers, how many users are accessing on Internet Explorer, if you even support that. If you don't, why don't you support it? Because we know that very often, particularly older users, use JAWS with Internet Explorer. Look at these things, kind of be smart about it. And you can't always necessarily have the data right there for you, but there are different ways to go around and try to understand who's doing what and how many users do you have on web versus on apps as well, assuming you've got both platforms. But yeah, I don't think there's a specific tool to track these things. There are many tools out there that do user-based tracking, so just use whichever one you have access to.
But I want to confirm one thing. So you can track your iOS user of your apps that using screen reader. Did you mean that?
On certain platforms you can. On other ones you can't. But yeah, specifically on iOS, it's quite easy to actually see how many voiceover users you've got.
So it's on your app statistic, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Too bad we have too many Android users here. Okay.
I'm not sure, but then again, it's because it's not necessarily my area of expertise. You're probably able to do the same on Android. I just haven't looked at it in depth. But yeah.
We will have Ray here to answer that. And from Ray, could you share some insight what ASOS gained since you are starting to improve the accessibility? That hard questions.
Well, that's it. It's an interesting question. We've definitely gained a lot of confidence. We're in an infinitely better place in terms of usability. Unfortunately, I still haven't done in-depth user testing to understand, what the improvement is, for users with specific special needs. But I know for a fact that the overall usability of our website has improved significantly. I do know that where we can track, kind of, for example, voiceover use, some of these numbers have slightly improved, but the reality is they're not going to improve significantly until we're able to go out there and share with the community that, hey, we've done all of this work. Do you want to come and try our app? And I'm personally reluctant to go out there and speak about this until I know that all of the blocks have been fixed, which is hopefully going to be very soon. But yeah, as I said, it doesn't happen overnight, and I've only been doing this for a year with ASOS, and I think realistically it's going to take, longer than a year to get to a place where we can actually, actively invite users to come in and use the app and spread the app and the website and spread the word. But yeah, two things we've definitely gained: confidence that we can tackle this, which I think is such a big part of the process. Just not being scared of accessibility and not being scared of, of understanding what it requires, and just an overall usability. When you look at the website and when you look at the apps, a lot of these fixes have just changed things and have made them more user-friendly.
Okay. Next question from Surya Dharma Putra. Can we automate accessibility testing, or it should be tested manually? Classic questions.
Both should be done realistically. You can't do one or the other. Or, you can probably have someone who's constantly doing manual testing, but that's just, that poor person is probably going to go crazy. You need to do both. You need to use automated testing tools in your QA process. That's the reality. They're going to catch, 20-30% of your issues, which is not everything, but it is something. And there's certain things that, if you can do this for free, why not? Why not embed this in your testing process? But you should always do manual testing. I'm having these conversations right now where we are looking at automating, a lot more. But I personally don't feel like at this point you can rely on automated testing altogether, because there are things like, even if you look at alt text for images, I just don't see how you're ever going to automate this. And it depends obviously on what kind of images you're using, but on a website like ASOS, we have so much content, and it's so hard to even, assess what should have alt text, what is decorative, what isn't. Like, is this alt text good enough? Should we add more alt text? Are we making the alt text too long and suddenly like the screen reader user is going to be overwhelmed? You need to have the awareness, and this is where you need to do training for people. You can't have one person, responsible for checking everything. Everybody should understand how alt text is done, for example. Everybody should be able to participate in this process. And it comes down to training, do the training once, see how people respond, give them a task to do. In a couple of months, go back. How are you guys doing? Should we do another session? Should we do a session on screen readers to show you just how bad things are or how good things are, depending on obviously where you stand. Yeah, I think this is the reality. You need to combine both and be smart about it.
All right. So there's a question from YouTube viewers from Ariske. You mentioned it before about to-do list accessibility in any large company, and it says that the audit, the core journey, and internal awareness audit. Mind to tell me more about it?
So I think these should go hand in hand. Core journey, just what is the aim of your product. The aim of the ASOS product is for you to go select an item, put it in your basket, check out, right? This is my core journey. There are other important journeys around that, but this is my core journey. I want to know that what is the status of this journey? Do I have any blocks? Can someone with a screen reader check out? Can someone with a keyboard only check out? All of it. You want to be aware of where your issues are. You can do this by yourself. You can do an audit. You can do it externally as well. You can pay a company, but you want to know where the blocks are. At the same time, you also want to understand how well do people around you know accessibility. Are they aware of what it is? Are they aware of, what it requires? Are they sold on it? And these two things are going to basically come together once you have an understanding of what you need to fix and once you have an understanding of how well people know how to fix it. I think that's kind of what I meant there. And again, it comes down to how big is your company? How big is your tech team? How well do you know these people? Communication is obviously a big thing. Identifying areas that are weak. Are there people who are really good developers, but they know very little about accessibility? They know very little about ARIA, for example. Can you do a training on ARIA? Or, do people they're just not sold on accessibility and they don't really care and they think it's something silly? So maybe then you just need to do an awareness training and invite someone in, who might be a disabled user, just to show, how they're not able to complete the journey. There are different ways around it. And, it's hard to speak like this without the same job and they have the same questions. And that saves you time. You don't have to repeat the same thing over and over again. They're going to ask you the questions that everyone cares about. And you're going to talk about that specific area, not accessibility in general, not screen readers in general. You're going to talk about screen readers when testing, or you're going to talk about screen readers, when you're developing, or you're going to talk to designers about creating documentation. So yeah, I would say segment the different areas. And it doesn't mean that you can't invite other people. You can do an open invitation, but you can say, I'm requiring all the QAs to come to this session. If any developers want to join, they're free to join, because there might be overlap between their jobs and how they do, for example, how they release, how they do new releases within their teams. But target specific audiences, I would say.
All right. So it's also important because the knowledge between each department is also different. Things that ring a bell for developers is not the same with the designers, right? Like, what the hell is ARIA? I don't know. Something like that.
Yeah, and your designers don't necessarily need to know what ARIA is.
Yes,
It's not
exactly.
really their job to know. It would be good for them to have an awareness of it, but that will come in time. But you can't be having the same conversations, I don't think, because people will get confused.
Okay. That was the last questions. So, is there anything else, or you have any last statement? Wait, last statement. Okay.
I mean, there's probably a lot to be said. It was a pleasure to speak to all of you. If you have any questions, forward them to Rahma. She can forward them to me, or find me on LinkedIn. I'll do my best to answer if I can. I'm by no means I don't have all the knowledge, but if I can help you, I would be very happy to do so. And yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And so that's a wrap for our session today. And if you have any more questions, you can ask on the group Telegram. I just find A11yID or A11yID, A11yID. Just look it at and Telegrams. Just joining the alley, the army, or whatever you want to name it. And we still continue gather people so that we build an army for accessibility as well and community in Indonesia.
In that direction.
And hopefully
All right,
with
I'm
this
going to
session.
stop off because I have another call.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you, Tzveta, for joining in.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice day. Bye.
Oke, buat yang masih ada di sini, kalau misalnya mau ngobrol-ngobrol juga boleh kok. Gimana? Kalau misalnya mau sambil diskusi boleh, atau mau diselesaikan saja. Aman? Oke, kalau begitu Terima kasih sudah bergabung di sesi hari ini. Semoga ini jadi sesi A11yID terakhir di tahun ini. Di tahun depan kita kayaknya akan memulai membahas soal topik yang lain lagi, mungkin dimulai akan general. Dan di Hari Disabilitas Internasional ini semoga tahun depan accessibility digital makin diprioritaskan ya, dan semakin banyak orang yang bisa mengimplementasikan. Dan buat yang lain yang menonton dan yang belum join A11yID, silahkan cari di Telegram A11yID, join aja, gratis kalau mau nanya-nanya. Dan selamat tahun baru semuanya. Terima kasih.